Hi. In this video I'm going to introduce you to class file. Class file is an abstract representation of file and directory path names. Yes, a representation of path names. What that means is class file is really a path. An instance of class file represents a file path or a directory path. So the next question is, what is a path? A path specifies the location of a file or directory on disk. I want to distinguish between two kinds of path, the absolute path and the relative path. An absolute path starts with the root directory, for example, C temp data text. That is different from the relative path. The relative path typically starts with the directory in which the application begins its execution. You can think of a relative path as a path that is relative to the current directory. An example of a relative path is date.txt. Let's have a look at the four constructors. I can pass the path name as a string, and based on that create the instance of my file. I can pass the path of the parent as a string and the path of the child as a string, or maybe the path of the parent as a file, which really is a path, and then the path of the child as a string. I could also pass a URI. Here are some selected methods of class file. Once I have, for example, a file, I can check whether I can read the file, whether I can write on that file. I can delete my file or directory. I can check whether a file or directory exists. I can get the name of my file or my directory, or the whole path as a string. I can check whether my quote-unquote file, which really is a path, is a directory, or whether it is a file. I can find out the length of my file, so this is only defined for files, doesn't work for directories. If my file, which is a path, happens to be a directory, I can call list on it, and it will give me a string representation of all its content. So here I will get all the path information as strings, and similarly, if my instance of the file, which really is a path, happens to be a directory, I can call list files, and that will give me all the path information as files. The last thing I want to point out here is the static field separator. It returns the local computer's separator that separates directories and files in a path. If you have a Linux or Unix system, for example, the separator character would be a /. If you have a Windows system, the separator character would be a /. Let's look at an example. What I want to do is the following. I want to create an instance of file. I want to initialize it with my directory, and then I want to use it to list the content of my directory. So here you can see my directory. It's called demo. It's on my C drive. It includes 2 subfolders, arrays and lists, and 3 files, demo class, demo Java, and readme text. So I'm going back to my code. I start by declaring a variable of type file. I name it path because I do know that file really represents a path, and I initialize it with a new file based on my directory, which is in C demo. Notice that I use a double / because the / is the escape symbol in a Java string. Now I'm going to use a for each loop to loop through all the elements in my directory, and I'm going to list them. So here I say for each string element in, and now I need to get all my elements from my directory, and I do that by calling list. So for each element in my path list, I'm going to print out the element. System out print line element. Let's compile, and there it is. My arrays directory, my list directory, demo class, demo Java, readme text. Now I want to modify my program, and I want to add a symbol before each of my subdirectories to indicate that those are subfolders. I'm going to use the double arrow. I'm going to create here a local variable character. I call it double arrow, and I'm going to use the Unicode escape sequence. It looks like this: 00BB, and this is the double arrow. And I would like to check if my element in my directory happens to be a subfolder, then use this double arrow. If it is a file, then just use a blank and indent it. At this point I was using path list, which returned me strings. Strings are fine if all I want to do is to use my names here. However, when I want to have more information, let's say information whether this is a directory or not, the string doesn't help me. File would help me. So I'm going to change this to file, and I'm not going to use path list because that returns a string. Instead, I'm going to say path list files. List files returns all my elements from the directory as files. Now at this point, I can actually check whether each of these elements happens to be a directory. And say, well, if my element is directory, then I want to print my double arrow. Otherwise, I just print a blank. In any case, I always want to print my element, not just the element, I also want to print an extra space between my double arrow and my element. So let's run. I have each of my subfolders marked with my double arrow here, and I have my files displayed with just a regular indentation. Each of my folders and my files is displayed with a fully qualified path. Let's say I want only the folder name or the file name. I could do that by calling here on my element the getName method. Now let's run it again. And at this point it shows me my folder CDemo has two subfolders, arrays and list, and it has three files: demo class, demo Java, and readme text.